You're listening to Bring Me the Axe. I'm Bryan White. I'm one half of this morbid equation. I'm joined by my co-host and actual brother, Dave White. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Pretty good. I've had Alanis Morissette's Ironic stuck in my head for like the last 3 hours.
Huh.
But it's kind of a mashup because it's that and that Civ song, Set Your Goals. I have them both kind of stuck in my head a little bit.
That's a weird combination.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about it, but I mean, they're both fine songs. I love Canada and I love hardcore from the early 90s. So it's a win-win, really, but I just.
Yeah. I often find myself haunted by songs that I listen to like a lot because I'm one of those people who, I'll be listening to like an album, or I'll be listening to like the sort of Spotify discovery thing, and I'll find something that really, really just hits it right on the button, and then I will proceed to play that song over and over and over again until when I'm not listening to it, I'm still kind of listening to it because it's just like whatever the hook was sticks in my head to a point where days down the road, I am like ready to sort of like carve my brain out. It's
okay. Like Menomina. It's that kind of earworm.
For a long time, it was Super Freak.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a choice.
Yeah,
a choice of a song.
In the quiet hours, like that bass line kind of comes through. It's mostly just that, and really kind of the hook from Can't Touch This. So
okay,
just over and over until the point where I'm ready to go check myself into a mental hospital.
And that's just life.
Yeah,
that's how life is. Isn't it ironic?
Don't do that. Yeah, I suppose drilling out brains and going into mental hospitals is a nice little segue into the movie we're going to talk about tonight.
Yep.
Yeah. So, hey, we practically grew up in neighborhood video stores, and the steady diet of utter garbage that those shops provided us with continues unabated to this day. There's no one else I enjoy chopping it up with more about trashy movies than Dave. Just before we get into it, here's a little housekeeping. If you want to keep up with us between episodes, you can also find us on Instagram at Bring Me the Axe Pod. Dave's over there at That Queerwolf. That's where we have a lot of fun. We play games with our followers. If you do the Instagram thing, give us a follow. It's a good time. Yep. We've got a sweet website at bringmetheaxe.com. You can listen to all our past shows there and read the transcripts. And if you don't know, we have another show called 99 Cent Rental, where we cover all manner of video store madness on the weeks that Bring Me the Axe is off. Our latest episode covering The Warriors is out now. It's a fucking great episode. And we'll be back next week to look at 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I believe we have a guest.
Yep.
Sweet. You can also contact us directly at bringmetheaxepod@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or suggestions. Do let us know if there's a movie that you love and would like to hear us give it the business. Lastly, if you like what you hear, you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube now. Search us by name and subscribe if you prefer to consume your podcasts that way. And you'd be doing us a favor by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And once again, I see the number going up, and it pleases me. It makes me so happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you listen on the regular and you have not done this yet, please do. It's super easy. It's way easier than you think. And you don't even have to write a review, though those are pretty helpful. And if you listen on YouTube, do us a favor, give the episode a like and leave a comment. We love hearing from you guys. I just want to get all that out of the way right at the top of the show because I'm about to give you a taste. So here's a taste.
Herbert West is at the top of his class in medical school.
How can you teach such drivel? These people are here to learn, and you're closing their minds before they even have a chance. What are
He's brilliant, but a little weird.
I've broken the 6 to 12 minute barrier. I've conquered brain death.
His experiments have always been unorthodox.
It was dead.
But lately, they're getting out of hand. And he's just made a discovery that could wake up the dead.
Herbert West has affected reanimation in dead animal tissue.
What are you thinking? How do you feel? You?
15 cc's of reagent being administered.
Once you wake up the dead, you've got a real mess on your hands.
He's dead?
Not anymore.
Herbert West brought a lot of dead people back to life, and not one of them showed any appreciation. H.P. Lovecraft's classic tale of horror, Re-Animator.
Mr. West.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head get a job in a sideshow?
It will scare you to pieces.
There it is, Re-Animator. H.P. Lovecraft's Re-Animator.
We've got movie sign. That's what I think every time.
We've got it's a hell of a movie and a goddamn classic, and it's one of my favorite of all time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where's it end up with you?
I have always, so this I think is another one that was on TV a lot, which is really surprising, though there is a television cut of it, so I know that it was on quite often. And I think it was a rental. So I've seen it a lot, and I saw it probably at an age far too early to be watching it. As is the case with most things. But I really like it a lot. It's a movie that is... I'm watching it and I don't want to take notes because I kind of just want to watch it because I don't know, it just draws you in. It's dopey as shit. But I think, as we were just discussing a moment ago, I think you and I kind of struggled with it this time around. Maybe just, I don't know if it's just for these purposes or coming at it from this perspective. But this is it's a bit of a Night of the Creeps situation.
Yeah.
Not nearly as bad, but...
No, but you know what it is it really is when we were talking about it earlier this week, I think that you really just kind of nailed it, where this movie is just incredibly obvious. And it just is what it is. And there's not really a lot. There's not really much of a production history to talk about. There's not really much to contextualize it by. You know, it's just a gory movie from the 80s that it's remarkable for a number of reasons, but it really is just like a bloody, silly, kind of ghoulish movie that hits all the right spots for me. But like you said, like, I just kind of wanted to watch it. I like to take like I did my usual note taking, and we're gonna break it down like we usually do. But yeah, I really did kind of struggle with this one and kind of dragged my feet, despite the fact that Arrow 4K is packed with shit to watch.
Full, yeah,
and it's all entertaining stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch to say about it, but it's not. I don't have a lot to say about the movie itself.
Yeah. So like we'll get into it like as we do, but you know let's run down the known details. Let's do the facts, shall we? The year was 1985. Banner fucking year for horror. Banner year for horror comedies as well.
Yeah,
you know,
which I think is important to note with this movie because I think this kicks off something in horror. This changes the trajectory a little bit.
It is a sea change. Like this is a real paradigm shift. And
I don't think anybody saw that coming.
No. So here's some other movies that were released that year. We've got Fright Night. See our Fright Night episode with Peaches Christ. It's a good one. Also that year, The Bride. Have you seen The Bride?
The Bride? I don't think so.
It's a sort of Gothic retelling of The Bride of Frankenstein, starring Jennifer Beals and Sting.
Wow, yeah. Sting was really having a time there as an actor in the 80s. Wasn't
he? Man, they booked him on Dune, and then they were like, you know what, we love him in Dune because I'll tell you what, he's not bad in Dune. And then they were like, hey, we've got this whole Bride of Frankenstein thing. Why don't we put him in this? And then nobody went and saw it.
Yep.
Also, 1985. Return of the Living Dead.
Now, I fucking love that movie.
Let me tell you a little something about Return of the Living Dead. Sweet spot.
Yeah.
Perfect little movie right there that I love to death. But also, like Fright Night, bit of a horror comedy that really lands. Here's another horror comedy from 85. The Stuff.
Ooh.
Yeah. Which is another movie that I enjoy tremendously. I love.
I don't know if I'd say that's a comedy. I think that's a satire.
It's a fine line.
If I'm gonna split hairs, let's just do it. That one's definitely a satire.
Yeah. Yeah, and then rounding it out, kind of a horror comedy, though some might argue Day of the Dead came out in 85.
I think George Romero maybe intended it to be, but I don't think it's as funny as he thinks it is.
No, but that movie is full of just bonkers, crazy ass performances. Yeah. So here's the cast and crew. The director is one of my all-time favorites. He's a guy that I love inside and outside of the horror genre because he didn't just work in horror movies. It's just his best stuff is horror movies. That's Stuart Gordon, absolute horror movie legend, one of my all-time favorites, as I said. The director, well, at the time of this movie, he was the director of a theater in Chicago called the Organic Theater, which seemed to produce a lot of original stuff. It all sounds a little stuffy and very arty.
Yeah.
I think his biggest thing at the time was something called Warp, which was apparently like a fucking hit in Chicago. Some sort of a science fiction thing that he did, because it wasn't the only sci-fi stage production that he did there. Because he also
I get the feeling that sci-fi was like that was his thing. That was the thing he was really interested in. I think Bryan Yuzna was more into horror.
Yeah. But I mean, Gordon also is pretty open about it. Like, he loves horror movies. But yeah, they did Warp, and then they took Warp to Broadway, where it failed magnificently, and they went back to Chicago. And then,
do you mean to tell me that on Broadway in the early 80s, a science fiction play did not do well?
I'm telling you.
What a world.
I know. But yeah, he had to, when they made this movie, he had to learn on the fly how to like actually shoot a film, because he was directing the movie like it was a play.
And I think you can tell that too.
There's a couple of scenes.
You can see it in a lot of.
A couple of scenes where that really, really shines through. Like the scene with the cat in the basement is one that is pure stage. But yeah, he has a real ghoulish sense of humor that I love, and he pushed the envelope in the 80s in a way that nobody else thought to do. When he was making horror movies, he really leaned into the gore maximalism of it all, and goddamn, I love him for it. The producer is a guy I got to mention also, because that's Bryan Yuzna, and usually we don't really mention the producers on these, but the Yuzna-Gordon connection was a real highly combustible pairing in the 1980s. They produced a ton of noteworthy business, and then once the two kind of split, their output as individuals was a real shadow of the product that they produced together.
What does Bryan Yuzna? He does Society.
Yep.
And then he does The Dentist, I believe.
Yeah. Everything that they do up to, like after, and I don't really know. I think they just kind of like parted ways, and it seems like a kind of an amicable thing. But I mean, it might have been predicated on some sort of an illness that Gordon had at the time, because that was one of the reasons that they were not fully involved in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Like, that's a story that kind of blows my mind, is that those two actually wrote a script and sold it to fucking Disney. And Disney was like, yes, makers of Re-Animator, you can make this family film for us, slated for 1989. And then some shit happened and they fell out and it ended up in somebody else's hands. But that story blows my fucking mind. But Bryan Yuzna is also a very accessible and a really nice guy. Like, back when we were doing Sub Rosa Drive-In, we wanted to show Re-Animator one summer. And there were like, it turned out that there were no non-license or non-theatrical licenses available. So I was like, how the fuck do I get? Because we also wanted to get in touch with people and sort of at least get verbal consent to do some of these movies. And at one point he had a website. He probably still does, and it just had his email on it. So I emailed him, not thinking that he'd ever get back to me, and he got back to me within hours with like enthusiastically saying like, yes, you can do this movie. You could do it for free. I won't charge you. And I'll even send you some posters. And I was like, okay, let me get my shit together. I'll get back to you. And then we sort of passed on it for reasons that I can't really remember. But yeah, super awesome dude. Yep. Our cast is a murderer's row. We got Jeffrey Combs, who's one of my favorite horror movie weirdos. And
he really, without him in this movie and in this role, it would not be nearly as memorable. I don't think it would have succeeded even remotely without him.
Not even close. No, he is the fucking cornerstone of the whole thing. It's amazing what he brings to this movie. He after a few small parts, he has Frightmare, and he's also in The Man with Two Brains with Steve Martin.
Oh, you've seen Frightmare?
Not in a really, really, really long time.
It's pretty rough. I watched it a couple months ago. I got it from Vinegar Syndrome for cheap, and it's worth watching for his performance. And even then, it's kind of like, I didn't need to see it.
Every now and then, I'm like, I'm going to watch Frightmare, and then I go to put it on, and I confuse it with several other movies that have very similar titles, and I end up watching them instead. So one of these days,
you're better off.
Yeah. So this movie right here kicks off a prolific career in the genres. He works with Gordon and Yuzna a bunch. He becomes a Charles Band regular, doing a total of 5 Lovecraft adaptations, playing Lovecraft himself in one of them. And then he also, I mean, on top of just a mountain of shit that he does, he plays several characters that involve a lot of makeup on different Star Trek series. And then he does a shitload of like voice work for cartoons and stuff. Dude is busy as hell.
Yeah, he has a very distinctive look and voice that probably lends itself well to voice work. But I wonder how I've never really seen many interviews with him. I wonder how he feels about it, because I think what he does with Stuart Gordon and Bryan Yuzna here, and then like does stuff with Charles Band, kind of pigeonholes him a little bit.
Yeah.
And I can only ever picture him. I mean, I've seen him in a shitload of things. I can only ever see him in these types of roles. Like, even when, he's in The Frighteners, he plays a pretty similar character. A little bit more unhinged.
He's a total psychopath in basically everything he does.
Yeah, and I just wonder, like, I wonder if there was, like, I wish I could have done more. I mean, he's successful, and maybe he has a lot of fun. It's like Vincent Price. Like, Vincent Price fucking loved everything he ever did, so.
Yeah, I would say he seems to, I met him once at one of those cons, and he seems to be one of those people who's just very comfortable with it. He stays busy. He gets to act. He gets to act in really kind of memorable, bonkers characters that people seem to love him for, and he just seems okay with it. I can't say for sure. I'm speculating. But when I did meet him, I had that kind of like, because of all of these movies that I've seen him in and because of the types of characters that he plays, I had a certain like impression of what he would be like when I met him, and he did not disappoint. He was a gigantic weirdo.
Nice.
Yeah. When we, in that sort of awkward sort of small talk that you make with these people when you meet them, like the only thing that he really kind of brought up was just, I took out that, I think it was Elite put it out. It was one of the first times that it came out on DVD in like a special edition. And he took the little slip cover out of it and he put it on the table and he kind of runs his hands over it for a second and he's like, I've seen a lot of these this weekend, but yours is different. It's of a much higher quality. And then he signed it, "You're next." And I was like,
Did he mean like a much higher moral quality or just physical? It's physical
like
character.
The physical characteristics of the paper that the fucking slipcase was printed on was apparently of a much higher quality than the other ones that he'd encountered. I don't know. It was so fucking strange. But then you see him in other interviews, and he just seems like a regular guy. So I don't know what the fuck he was doing then.
He was giving you the full experience. The full Jeffrey Combs experience is what he's giving you.
When you hand over, I think his autograph cost $10 at the time, which is fucking amazing compared to what that shit costs now. He was like, "I'm gonna give this dude his money's worth." But yeah,
wow.
Yep.
Wonder what $100 gets you.
Jesus.
I don't want to know.
Me either. Oh, let's see. Coming up, we got Bruce Abbott, good-looking B-movie guy. He started out on stage like pretty much everybody in this movie. Goes on to do a lot of television, straight-to-video fodder. He started 3 seasons of some 90s show that I'd never heard of called Dark Justice. And then he retires from acting somewhere.
That sounds like something that was on Fox.
It must have been.
Like around the time that like Briscoe County Jr. and shit like that?
It was either one of those Fox shows or it was one of those sort of like syndicated shows that didn't really have a network home. But there's 3 seasons of it. And apparently he plays a judge who's like disillusioned with the system, like when his wife is murdered. And so he goes out on the road and he sort of like pressures previous defendants who'd like escaped justice in the past to like join his vigilante gang or something. The whole thing sounds ridiculous.
I'm in. I like ridiculous stuff.
Yeah. Then he retires from acting somewhere around 2010. He was married to Linda Hamilton for a little while.
Weird.
Yeah. Number one in several connections to the Terminator that this movie has. Yep. And nowadays, he's a professional architect.
All right.
Yeah. And then lastly, and certainly not least, one of my favorite characters in all of horror, fandom, it's Barbara Crampton of The Bold and the Beautiful and Days of Our Lives and Guiding Light.
I love when, and this happens a lot, when you look somebody up and it's like, yep, they come from soap operas. Because I have...
She doesn't just come from soap operas. She comes from, like, all of them.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that it seems like nobody ever did one soap opera. You were on, like, all of them.
Right. And
for long stretches. Then you'd go do another one when your tenure at, like, fucking General Hospital or whatever ended. Now, I'm not a soap opera person, with the exception of Dark Shadows. But I have so much respect for soap opera people, just the way that they produced. It is the most guerrilla shit I've ever heard.
The churn of that system is remarkable as hell. And I don't really know why exactly, but in the late 90s, like when I was living in school and like Denise was living with me, we watched Days of Our Lives fucking daily. Like did not miss it for weeks.
There are literally like 20,000 episodes. You could watch it for the rest of your life. Those really are the days of your lives.
Like sands in the hourglass.
Yeah, like if you're, like I said, I love Dark Shadows because there's 2,000 episodes of it.
And it's all
and I've seen them all.
It's all silly and ridiculous and compelling as hell. It makes perfect sense that she sort of seamlessly makes her way over to this just like ridiculous, outrageous genre stuff. Because like,
yeah,
it's fucking great. It's wild. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of like her thing is she started, I believe, on Guiding Light. I can't remember. Maybe The Bold and the Beautiful. That was the one that she was on for like hundreds and hundreds of episodes. But then she kind of gets into film, and this kind of opens the door for like a lot of horror stuff. She becomes kind of like an 80s scream queen, though I don't really feel like she really falls in with them very neatly because like the parts that she plays tended to be a little meatier. But yeah.
What is she? She goes from this to Chopping Mall. And there's no scream. Like, I don't know. I associate scream queens with slashers. I hate the term to begin with. I hate the idea, but I associate it with slashers, and she's not really in many of those.
No. But she does do a good deal of work with Charles Band. Everybody does a good deal of work with Charles Band.
Yeah, he's like the Wu-Tang Clan of fucking horror movies.
He really is. And but also particularly, she works with Stuart Gordon quite a bit. She also does just like Jeffrey Combs, she does a bunch of Lovecraft adaptations. And then she sort of fades and semi-retires in the 90s. She appears here and there in like small roles. But is mostly out of the game until 2011 when Adam Wingard brought her out of retirement for You're Next. And then
I feel like that seems like a thing though, doesn't it? Like, all these people from the 80s, maybe 90s too, they kind of like, they have their run in horror and a lot, they kind of wind it down with like direct to video shit. And then they're like, all right, I think I'm good. I'm going to be a mom or whatever, whatever they go to do. And then all of a sudden there's like, it's not just the horror con circuit that wants them. It's like, oh, there's a market to have you appear in pretty like micro budget shit and you're only in it for like 10 minutes, but like that kind of revives it. And then there's like a legacy component by the time like Adam Wingard and like those guys come along and you see like Dee Wallace pops into like Ty West's movie for a minute, like shit like that.
Yeah. Well, what it really is first of all, Rob Zombie breaks the seal.
Yes.
He's the guy who goes to whatever, horror con is nearest and just like, okay, you, and you're all coming with me. I'm going to put you in my movie.
Because he does what Tarantino does. Like, I'm going to go find these people who haven't been in shit in 10 years or haven't been in like, notable shit in 10 or 15 years. And I'm going to throw them in this. It's stunt casting stuff, basically. And there becomes like a whole industry of people who are now like that is their form of casting, is basically just stunt casting every fucking part.
Yeah.
Rob Zombie. I mean, every part in his movies is a cameo.
Yeah.
Just a really big cameo.
Sometimes I find it really annoying. Depends on the filmmaker, I suppose. But her return is definitely a little more remarkable than others. Like, did you see We're Still Here, I think is the one that's called?
Yep. I like that one.
She's fantastic in that one. Like that part is like way more. I really buy the sort of mother in grief story that she's kind of selling with her character. Like it's not something that I was expecting, but I mean, she's also been in some real fucking garbage too. But like, you know, she's a very capable actor is kind of the point I'm trying to make, I suppose. Like she's just not a body that gets killed. You know, that's that like a lot of women who were in horror movies at the time. Yep. So here's some taglines for this movie. I'll start with the best one. Herbert West has a good head on his shoulders and another one on his desk.
Ayo.
Yeah. That's a good one. Art of the tagline right there. And then another one. This one is in a lot of the ads. It will scare you to pieces. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's a little bit of a pun, you know? It will scare you to pieces.
Yeah. Sigh.
And then lastly, death is just the beginning.
Yeah.
So here's a little trivia for you. A little bit of background about this movie. This movie is originally based on one of 6 short stories by H.P. Lovecraft, which were published in the early, basically in an early example of a fanzine. It was called Homebrew in 1922. Lovecraft did not care for these stories, but honestly, Lovecraft didn't care for much of what he wrote. He was always really down on basically everything that the dude ever wrote. He just hated it.
And I mean, I'm not. You are a Lovecraft fan. I am not. I think he is a bad writer. I think he is a horrible racist. He cannot write dialogue for shit. I think he has good ideas, though.
That's what everybody kind of hooks into, because a lot of people do freely admit that his writing is frilly and purple and ridiculous. It's loaded down with like strange turns of phrase and like overuse of very obscure adjectives, and it's very weak in the characterizations. He doesn't.
Well, I mean, he never talked to any. Like one of the reasons I suspect one of the reasons he's not good at dialogue is because he didn't talk to people. He was pretty mentally ill. It seems like a miserable man. So
yeah, his he was a shut-in basically, and the sort of arc of his life is terribly tragic from fucking beginning to end, because he was born and raised in Providence at the sort of very, very, very tail end of a sort of Gilded Age, but like his sort of family legacy is that of one of those sort of like Gilded Age families, but they were sort of like fallen nobility at this point, and their fortune was gone, and both of his parents died screaming mad in fucking mental hospitals, and the man spent all of his life essentially living in terror that one day the other shoe would drop and he would also go, you know, like totally fucking insane. Like they were psychotic people, his parents. And so, but also I hesitate to speculate on anything of the sort, but I also sort of think that he was kind of like maybe somewhere on the autism spectrum. He did not relate very easily to other people. He was really incapable of speaking in public or like really kind of holding social connections that were anything more than pen pals, because he was a prolific writer of letters.
He was. Did you ever read The Night Ocean?
No.
Came out, I don't know, it's maybe 5-6 years ago. It's speculative fiction, and it's about the kind of weird and pretty inappropriate relationship he had with that like 16-year-old. He like went and lived with the kid's family for like a little while.
He wasn't even that old. I believe that kid was like 12.
Yeah, it is really bizarre, and I think the guy ended up killing himself much later, and it had nothing to do with that. But
yeah, but he was an author. Also, that kid, I can't remember his name.
He was a professor. He was like professor of anthropology, and he wrote a bunch of fiction and stuff. It's a really, really good book. It's not it's sort of about Lovecraft. It's kind of an allegory for something else, but I really loved it. But it frames him as a guy who. I mean, he's all these things. He's kind of miserable and misanthropic, but also he had such an inferiority complex. So when it came to all these other weird fiction writers who were kind of trying to be supportive and being enthusiastic, eventually they got to a point where they were like, "Man, fuck you! You're such an asshole. We're so fucking tired of you." And I imagine that's probably how he really was. But the point is, read The Night Ocean. It's a great fucking book.
That's not really the case. He kept a lot of these friendships he kept entirely through writing, and I think that's probably how he was able to sustain them for as long as he did. Because I think that if people were to spend really any amount of time with him, like his wife did, you get tired of him very quickly. And so
I can imagine. He sounds like an awful person.
But his whole thing. But like you said, the magic lies entirely in his ideas, which I will admit, I do like his ideas quite a lot. Yeah, that's really where it's at. It's the sort of the seeds of all of this, the sort of horror fiction that comes in the wake of him, are sort of planted in these weird sort of short stories that he wrote and published in Weird Tales and other kind of pulpy magazines. But there are very strange characteristics about them that go kind of beyond the sort of signature stuff with the elder gods and, the sort of outer beings and all the kind of weird Cthulhu shit that he came up with. First of all, there's never any women in his stories. And there's always not always, but very commonly, there's a pairing of men where one of them is sort of a bold, daring, dashing weirdo, and his sort of effeminate.
You want to say what you're actually getting to?
I'm trying to say that I think that his characters were all gay.
Most people, I think it seems like the consensus is that he was probably gay.
I don't know, because his stories are also so fucking sterile especially in those relationships. And I think maybe that came as a sort of a product of him just not being able to fucking face up to that. Yeah. But it's always Randolph Carter and Harley Warren, and Harley Warren is this madman who just cannot be held back from the unknown, and Randolph Carter is this effeminate little guy who just really, really respects Harley Warren.
I mean, it's not that different from a lot of the sort of colonialist fiction that was coming out around the same time. It's very romantic. It's just instead of a dashing hero and a sort of damsel in distress, it's a kind of madcap, devil-may-care hero and his little sidekick.
Yeah.
His girl Friday.
It's so wild, and it's such a common characteristic that just everybody kind of glosses over. Nobody fucking.
And that is what the premise of The Night Ocean has a lot to do with that, where it's it's about a woman whose husband is a writer, and he thinks that he finds these series of letters to prove that Lovecraft did in fact have a gay relationship, and I don't want to spoil the book, but it turns out to be, the story is really about why people believe the things that they believe even when they're not true, or they might not be true. It was a really great book. I really encourage everyone to check it out. But yeah, it doesn't really paint him in the best light, because I don't think he really was. I mean, he wasn't really a nice person.
He was a fucking absolute maniac and a terrible, terrible person. And I think that even as much as I do enjoy his fiction, if I were to have ever, by whatever fucking fantastical circumstance, if I were to ever meet him, I would fucking hate him. And if he were alive today, I'm absolutely certain that he would be some MAGA fucking weirdo that I would just immediately be fucking turned off from.
And I think you can see some of that this doesn't, again, I've never read these, I've read some Lovecraft, never the sort of this type of stuff. But it seems like this is not a one-to-one adaptation, because this movie feels a lot like Frankenstein more than it does Lovecraft.
So it's not, it's based mostly on the first two. So there's, like I said, there's 6 of these stories. And of his stuff, like Lovecraft really did not like these ones in particular, but he kept writing them because the publication that was printing them paid him more than the others, and like he was scraping out pennies a word for his stories and shit. So the dude was broke. But it's not 1-to-1, obviously, but it's in the ballpark. But yeah, but also Frankenstein plays a huge role in it as well. Like I think that's really where Gordon was coming from. The Lovecraft stuff is that did kind of make it in and is very sort of like that you can kind of compare to the short stories. That's all Dennis Paoli.
But I will say, kind of where I was going with that is that you can feel some of that misogyny and misanthropy in Re-Animator.
Oh, sure.
I think it is, as much as I enjoy this movie, I think it is a deeply misogynistic movie that is such a product of its era that it's a little bit jarring sometimes.
until I really sort of watching it for this run, I never really paid that much attention to it. But the Megan Halsey character is just there to be like
ogled and possessed.
Exactly. She's the sort of weird push and pull between like not just like Dr. Hill and Dan.
Everybody
also,
in this movie except for Herbert West is trying to like own her in some way.
Herbert West is trying to pull Kane away from her. She's like to him, she's an obstacle to. Like,
I mean, not for any romantic reasons, not at all. But
no. But again, like that sort of. God, I hate the fucking alpha beta thing, but like it really is. That's the sort of dynamic here. Is West is that sort of wild-eyed, crazy Harley Warren character from Lovecraft stuff, and Dan Kane is the sort of unnamed narrator who just cannot help himself but admire this guy who's sort of dragging him towards oblivion.
Well, West is also Victor Frankenstein.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He's a man who's like possessed by his work and just hyper dedicated to what he's doing at the expense of everything else.
Yeah.
But I think this movie is what is interesting about, because neither of us had much to say about the movie, but it really lends itself to watching it in the way that we're kind of watching these movies, in that I think if you showed this now, what I think you'd come away with is a very different understanding and very different interpretation, because I think people would project a lot onto this that was not really intended, and the ideology from which this comes is pretty 80s, pretty like male-centric 80s movie, whereas now I watch it and I'm like, I know that Herbert West is not supposed to be the protagonist of this film, but I think if you showed this, you would get at least half of your audience would say he's the protagonist of your film.
Yeah.
And everyone else just sucks.
At a certain point, he does kind of objectively become the protagonist.
Yeah, begrudgingly, but yeah. But if I watched some of these interviews with Stuart Gordon and Bryan Yuzna, and they referred to Bruce Abbott. They call him the unsung hero, that he really holds the movie together. And they go on to say that without the character of Dan, it's just a movie with a bunch of weirdos. And so here are my thoughts on all of this, because I have a lot to say about that in particular, because I think the character of Dan is boring as fuck. He's
what was it that we were watching where we kept calling him like beige? He's just the fucking boring straight dude in the movie.
Well, so they see him at Night of the Creeps. Not quite to that extent, but like they see him as the audience surrogate.
Yeah.
But that only works if you're thinking of your audience as straight white young men. Which, of course, that was what horror movies were pitched to back then anyway. I mean, that's what everything was pitched to back then.
Well, sure.
And so the fact that they're like he's the audience surrogate. Well, it's like, not if you're anything else, he's not. And so that's why I think now, and where people are sort of free to express themselves and their identities in various different ways, I think a lot more people would be drawn to Herbert West because there is a weird queerness to him. And I don't mean like queer in a gay way. I mean like just he is the ultimate outsider who does not give a fuck.
Oh, sure. And that's the thing. Is like I don't give a fuck about Dan Kane. Like he's just a character in the movie. I fucking love Herbert West. He's like he's the color of the entire movie. Of at least of the people that you could call arguably the good guys. He's the one that I want to see more of. Like Dan, just like. He's just there.
He's boring.
He's boring as
He's
hell.
extremely boring. I mean, West has this kind of like drag queen's ruthlessness whenever he talks to anybody. That he just has contempt for everybody. It's kind of awesome. But like, I just think it's funny that they still see it that way. And that's, I think, how most people who made horror movies, and certainly studios, thought of like, that's our audience. When the reality was that wasn't their audience. I mean, it's part of the audience, but that wasn't. And that's, I think that's why it's so interesting to watch them now, because you can see what they thought they were making versus how it ages and what it actually seems like to everybody else.
Yeah. Oh God, I know it's so hard to contend with because it was such a common, it was the common working conditions of like basically any creative endeavor or any mass market creative endeavor in the 70s and 80s. For every woman who was making like a horror movie, there were like 400 men making horror movies with much larger budgets. And that's
true of movies in general, though. Like,
well, sure,
you know, there was like, you know, for every movie getting made, you know, there were 10 men and one woman.
Yeah. But you know, I mean, just things are different now, and that's.
Unfortunately, maybe I don't think they're as different as maybe they could be or should be, but they are at least a little bit different. I mean, they were talking about one of the characters, Dr. Hill, was originally supposed to be a quote African voodoo priest, end quote. And I thought, thank God they didn't do that, because that would have been racist as hell.
I know. Yeah.
In a movie that's already chock full of isms, I don't think we need one more.
Yeah. So the original cut of this movie was over 2 hours long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it involves a couple of subplots that ended up cut from the theatrical version, which runs on a lean 87 minutes.
I think the problem, though, is that they cut it, but it seems like they maybe put the movie together, then, like they had this sort of master cut of the film, then they went back and edited, because there's so much shit that's sort of referenced throughout the movie where you're like, why? This doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yes,
and it feels like something's missing here.
I'm going to point those out because there is an extended version of this movie that's like almost 2 hours long that you can watch that has a lot of that stuff left in it. It's way too long, though. And I definitely don't like that version of it. And then the Arrow disc comes with a lot of those like extended scenes that has a lot of the crap that you see bits and pieces of sort of left in, just because if they were to strip it out, they would be stripping out most of the story. And so the shit that gets left in feels a little wonky.
Yeah, so you end up with like, and I think it's cut for good reason, because I watched most of that stuff, and it's completely unnecessary. Some of it's offensive, and like you just don't need it in there. Yeah. But it ends up causing continuity problems, because you're like, why do I feel like they should have talked about this before?
Yeah, why is he talking to them like that? Like, why do they keep cutting to this like weird fuzzy lens on Dr. Hill?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing is, one of the subplots is Dr. Hill was supposed to have like this like master of hypnosis, which is a perfectly pulpy thing that would have been in keeping with the sort of tradition of weird fiction and like weird tales and H.P. Lovecraft. But they came and they cut it all out, but there's still parts of it left in that it's like, why like without the context of this sort of skill that he supposedly has. A lot of the times I'm left wondering, like, why is he talking to this person like this? Why does West just hand over his notebook? You know, we'll get there.
I mean, don't worry. They're going to recycle that whole plot in Fallout 4 many years later.
Yeah. So, the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, of which I'm a lifetime member, they produced an episode of their Dark Adventure radio theater based entirely on this, and it's fucking great. There's also a musical version of Re-Animator that was directed by Stuart Gordon.
You think it's any good?
There's bits and pieces of it on that disc.
I remember hearing about it when it came out, but I've never seen anything that has to do with it.
No, I've been tempted to go to some of these like musical adaptations of horror movies. Like I almost went to see the Evil Dead musical when it was in Boston.
Yeah, they did that here, and I was going to go because it just seemed fun, but I have COVID, so
Yeah.
I don't go to things because of that.
Yeah. So maybe one of these days I'll get out there. But most interestingly, this seems to have been struck from the record of the internet forever. I had to really dig for this because when I was doing Cinema Suicide, I remember being sent press releases by a company called Transition Entertainment, who were trying to basically hype up a pilot that they were developing for a show that was called Herbert West Re-Animator.
I vaguely remember that.
And the cast was it was essentially basically Riverdale, but Lovecraft stuff. And so it was like Herbert West is a teenager, and Randolph Carter is a teenager, and Harley Warren's also in it as a teenager. But like I had to go to the fucking Wayback Machine and dig up my old website to find that article, and like there it was, and it is nowhere else. And there was even a cast photo at one point that I just cannot find.
God, listen, everybody, go give the Internet Archive your money because they are doing the Lord's work there, preserving shit that everybody would otherwise forget about.
Wow. Like a Re-Animator TV show. And if you, and listener, if you can find that photo, that cast photo, send it to me. I really want to see it. Yeah. Also, a weird little bit of trivia that I'd heard. Mac Ahlberg, who was the movie's like DP, he claims that David Bowie told him that it's one of his favorite movies.
Yeah.
And
yes.
he said that they were working on something together, and that when Bowie found out that he worked on Re-Animator, I told him this. But I went and looked at Ahlberg's like resume. There's nothing on there that Bowie worked with him on. At least of records. So I don't know. I hope that's true though, because I kind of love the idea of David Bowie just like watching this movie and loving it.
And also, I mean, it sounds like Mac Ahlberg is also like the one who held this whole production together. He's like the reason it didn't go off the rails. Him and fucking Charles Band's father.
Yeah. Charles Band hardly involved in this movie at all, remarkably.
And I was disappointed to learn that it came down to like lawsuits over distribution for this one. Like they were, so Yuzna's trying to get it back. Get the licensing back for it, and it sounds like Charles Band. But I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any ill will between them. It sounds like it's just that's kind of how it goes in Hollywood or wherever the fuck you're making movies. But I was disappointed. Like, I have a picture of Charles Band in my head, like who he is as a man, and I don't want that to change.
I know. I suppose I can't. Like, I really want to talk about Charles Band. But in the context of this movie, it doesn't really make sense. We will have to do something with that he was like directly involved in, because he's a really
I think we are.
I hope so.
At some point, I thought we are. If not, I'll find a way.
Yeah, but he's a.
Man, we're out of flexibility though with the schedule. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, we are scheduled straight up to the end of the year. But yeah, he's a fascinating guy, and I find him very, very interesting. Like, and his impact, not just on like horror in general, but like the entire home video market, cannot be overstated. It's crazy the sort of Charles Band effect had.
Yeah, I mean, he like picked up the sort of De Laurentiis mantle, drove it into the ground a little bit, and, sullied it a little bit more.
Yeah, the way that I kind of see him and the way that he sort of affected low budget genre filmmaking is at the point where Roger Corman had kind of fully bowed out of his sort of creative endeavors and was just kind of like producing features as a purely kind of financial device. Charles Band kind of picked up the torch and ran with it.
But let's be honest, with much less talent. Roger Corman was an incredibly talented guy.
I don't know. I'd argue that Band could stretch $1, but I also really applaud his sort of willingness to sort of spend money on really gimmicky shit that ends up working in the end. Like, nobody else working on the budgets that he was working on would have dared to do stop motion animation, and he did it in a shitload of his movies.
So where I kind of landed with the sense of humor in this, and I think I will extend this to Charles Band Productions more broadly. So I mean, from Empire through to whatever he's doing now, is that it's like if the people behind Trauma were smarter.
Yes.
like there is a wit and a kind of like a wink and a nudge to them that Troma, I think, thinks that they're doing. I have no love for Troma, everybody. They can fuck off for all I care. I hate their movies. I have disdain for them. But I think they think they're a lot smarter than they are. And I think what they think they are is actually what Charles Band and I think what this movie is. I think this is a very smart, very funny, clever movie. I think it's a little mean sometimes, but it's of its time.
Yeah. All right. So the famous reagent from this movie, the glowing serum that Wes used to revive his corpses, was sourced from Chemlight glow sticks. They used hundreds of them during the production. And I was going to explain how you actually make that stuff, but the chemistry is powerfully boring and the compounds are hard to pronounce. So fuck it. They've been using these lights in the U.S. military for a little while, but they'd only just recently, as of 1984, entered the consumer market as a Halloween novelty.
I mean, each one of those has like 2 tablespoons in it, so they must have needed a fuckload of them.
I think they said something like nearly 1,000 of them were used.
Wow.
Because also, it doesn't just glow forever. Like that shit fades pretty quickly. Yeah. So, this movie was not submitted for a rating. And Yuzna knew that there was no way in hell that they could get an R without cuts. The final cut of the movie was already pretty short. So they leaned into the graphic violence, sold it not with trailers or advertisements, but with warnings, which has Charles Band's fingerprints all over it, and I love it. So,
to that point, it really pays off because this movie was very, very well received critically.
Yeah. So
it won accolades from like Roger Ebert and everybody.
It won a Critics' Choice Award at Cannes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is nuts. So here's an example of one of their TV spots.
This is not an advertisement for a new movie. This is a warning. If you are squeamish, a victim of nightmares, or have a weak heart, know your fright potions before you see H.P. Lovecraft's classic tale of horror, Re-Animator.
This is cheap as hell.
Way beyond the possibility of any rating.
This looks like I made this.
Yeah. Like stock,
like earlier today.
Stock footage, like GIFs on fucking Getty Images and shit.
It really, that is some cheap garbage, and I think it's fantastic.
I fucking love it to death because they're like, warning, do not see this movie, you pussies.
I mean, and I love when people do this shit because it's really just William Castle.
It really
this
is.
is William Castle's shtick through and through.
Yep. I dare you to watch this movie, loser.
Oh man. I mean, it's Castle for the 80s, basically.
Pure Charles Band, just all up in there.
I love a gimmick, though. I mean, I appreciate that.
I do. It shows initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. And lastly, before we really get into the plot, and I'm sure that you've got some reviews that you'd like to spring on me.
Yeah, I might. Let me just give it up my shit here.
Yeah. Music is by Richard Band.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Music is by Bernard Herrmann.
Which, that's my note about this. Is as much as I love the soundtrack and the score of this movie, of all of the, because we've done this so many times where we'll be like, oh man, the music in this movie is so great, but it's just Psycho. Of all of the movies that have done that, where they're like very clearly inspired by Psycho, this is the one that is the most egregious.
Yeah, this is literally Psycho. It is a direct, and he's acknowledged that. He's said as much in the past. Like he's paying homage, but it's like no you're not. You may as well have just been playing the record in the background.
But also it's my favorite of the Richard Band soundtracks. I also love his soundtrack for From Beyond, and that one's also pretty good and way more original.
I'm gonna hit you just with two.
Okay.
So I mean, it did very well, like for most people. If I think at minimum, people were like, yeah, it's pretty good, it's fun, but a lot of people really liked it. But here's the two that I'm gonna hit you with. So here's the first one. I walked in with no particular expectations. I walked out somewhat surprised and reinvigorated by a movie that had the audience emitting taxi whistles and mild goat cries. That is a one Roger Ebert. He gave it 3 out of 5 stars.
That's pretty good.
Slightly less enthusiastic, but still enthusiastic. And yet, if Re-Animator offers only a few laughs, that still puts it miles ahead of George Romero's awful Return of the Dead. Shut up, you fucking jerk off. The third in his, I think he means
Day
Dawn
of the Dead.
Day of the Dead. The third in his zombie series, which suffered from tired blood. At least director Gordon's ghoulies drool on naked women and decapitate each other with shovels. Jean Siskel, Chicago Tribune.
These two old fucking curmudgeons are being way too generous with this movie for my comfort.
If Statler and Waldorf can enjoy it, so can you.
Yeah. But
these two bitches.
But like this movie also got some pretty not rave reviews, but solid reviews from people like Pauline Kael. Like they definitely. I don't think anybody was really expecting this movie to review as well as it did. Like, I think that this was the sort of thing that Stuart Gordon was doing to sort of either make some money in the short term or sort of open doors in the future, like a lot of these guys do, where they're just like, well, let's make a fucking horror movie because it's easy to get funding for it. And then they get into it and they find out that they're just really good at making horror movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, surprisingly, a well-received movie, and good for them.
Yeah, I think it's good stuff.
Yeah. So shall we?
You do it.
All right. We open on the dean of the Zurich University leading 2 cops to a disturbance in one of the classrooms. There's a terrible commotion behind the door. When they break it open, we find our leading man, Herbert West, looming over the struggling body of Dr. Hans Gruber.
Dr. Hans Gruber.
Yep. Later to be found robbing the Nakatomi Plaza.
Exactly.
Yep. So the police pull West off of him, and Gruber suddenly leaps up, looking pained and all jacked up. His eyes suddenly burst out of his head, spraying blood on everybody there.
It's real awesome.
I love it. It's such a great effect. That's the thing is this movie, the special effects are so good. They're so good. It's all rubber and just bursting splashy shit.
Yeah, I mean it looks in 4K. It looks a little bit cheap, but in a way that I think it still feels fun. It's like when you watch, we watched King Kong the other day. It's like, I know that this is stop motion animation. I will take this over CGI any fucking day. Same with this. It looks a little bit cheesy, but it's so right on for the tone of the movie.
I'm right there with you. VFX are here to stay. I even went to school in order to produce them. But like nothing beats like a physical puppet or a physical effect. You know, it has dimension. It feels like it has weight. It feels like something that you can reach out and touch. Whenever I watch anything with it that's very heavily, that uses, VFX very heavily, like it does not feel like it's really there. I'm constantly aware that like, this is not a real thing that I'm staring at. It exists solely in the space of a computer, and it really takes me out of shit. I'm also that way about like stunts and stuff like that. Like when a movie is very clearly just a VFX ragdoll in a computer, like rattling around, and they're not actually doing the stunt. Like I have no enthusiasm for movies like that. Like I love something that is actually like physically crafted.
Yep.
And I love that it's still cheaper nowadays it's cheaper to do VFX, but whatever. Rubber stuff rules. Give it to me that way. Yeah. So the woman who reported this scene to the cops accuses West of killing Gruber, to which he turns to the camera and proclaims, "I gave him life."
He is so unhinged from like the jump that you're in for it. It's going to be good.
He always looks, he's kind of like Steve Railsback in that way, that he is just like sweaty and frightened throughout the entire movie.
Yep.
I love it. So now we cue titles, and I'm pretty sure that's the same font that they use for Law and Order.
I don't know why I was so taken with the title sequence here. Like the colors are great. Everything is really popping in 4K. It looks great. It has a kind of a. Remember when Terry Gilliam used to do like title cards for shit?
Yeah, for like Monty Python.
Yeah, it sort of feels like it reminded me of the opening titles that he did for Dr. Phibes.
Yes. Yeah,
it had that similar.
It's very kinetic and colorful. That's what I love it, and everything is timed with the music, and the titles don't just flash. They kind of come towards you, and then they move away from you, and everything's just fucking on the move, and it's so cool. So then we cut to Miskatonic University in scenic Arkham, Massachusetts.
Beautiful.
Yep. Miskatonic is patterned on Brown University in Providence.
So not in Massachusetts. Why didn't he set it in Rhode Island?
I don't know. Lovecraft liked to travel a lot, and so
alone, everybody.
Oh yeah, and on a bus, and
certainly not with men. Gross.
That'd be gay. I think that he would go to these places, and he was just so familiar with Providence that he was just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna write this shit, and I'm gonna make up my own thing. And so
I can appreciate that.
But he spent a lot of time. He was his fucking the shit that he was into was really weird. He was a guy who was he spent a lot of time at the Athenaeum and at the Hay Library and shit like that. He was just a dude who liked
those places are real snooty.
Yeah, and he was a real snooty guy. He thought he was a real fucking gentleman, you know. But Miskatonic is patterned on Brown, like I said, and Arkham is supposed to be it's somewhat patterned on Providence, but it could be reliably placed somewhere north of Boston, like Danvers or Salem. Yeah.
Heard of it.
Yep. But yeah, its proximity to an asylum, to an insane asylum, is where it kind of gets the whole Danvers Salem connection, because that asylum that used to be on the hill in Danvers, it's now a bunch of apartments. That's what Arkham Asylum was based on. So, yeah, I can imagine living in a fucking apartment up there. The place used to be where they fucking did, lobotomies and shit like that.
I guess. I mean, it was the state owned it for so long that it was that's the one from Session 9, right? Yeah, the state owned it forever. It was a document storage forever.
Yeah, just bad vibes, man. Bad vibes. I knew some people who, broke up in there and, walked around and shit. It's a spooky location. And it doesn't help that it fucking just sits on top of that hill and just looms over 95.
It's built like a bat too.
Yes,
in the shape of a bat.
Not anymore. It's not, but in its time when it operated, it did, which is fucking badass. Yeah. So also, but the building in this, the actual Miskatonic University, that's also the exterior that they used for Cyberdyne Systems in Terminator 2.
Really?
Yep. And not the last Terminator connection in the movie. So we meet Dan Kane. He's working on resuscitating a woman in a hospital bed. The doctor with the paddles in this scene is Gordon's wife, Carolyn Purdy. And the woman is not responding to the resuscitation efforts, but Kane is unwilling to let it go until he's forced to.
Yeah, put a pin in that one, everybody.
Yeah. So Kane takes the corpse down to the morgue, where Dr. Hill uses Chekhov's laser drill to drill a hole into a dead man's head. Kane is suddenly startled by the dean of the university, Dean Halsey, who introduces him to a new student at Miskatonic, the prickly weirdo Herbert West.
Now, I love that Herbert West ostensibly kills someone in Switzerland, and there's really no consequences. He just has to go somewhere else.
Well, it's not clear what happens to Gruber. He, maybe he died.
I mean, he explodes his eyes, so he's not doing well.
Because he only puts the reagent in dead bodies, right?
That's true.
So maybe Gruber had a heart attack or something, and he was like, "Oh shit, I must not waste this opportunity."
Yeah, we know he didn't kill Hans Gruber, but do they know?
Yeah, right. Oh, okay, yeah, right. West and Hill butt heads immediately, with West accusing him of ripping off the work of his previous mentor, Dr. Gruber, whose eyes exploded out of his head only moments before.
Yeah, and I mean, Herbert West comes in so fucking hot every single time. Every conversation is going into battle, and it is fantastic. He just automatically accuses him of plagiarism.
He hates everybody except for Dan Kane.
Yeah, and even then, it's you're here to help me.
Yeah. So Kane then posts a card on the corkboard at the school looking for a roommate.
You see the address there?
I did. 666 Darkmoor.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Kane then posts the card. In walks his girlfriend, Megan. Cut to a little sexy time back at his place.
Ugh, God.
At the head of his bed is a poster for the Talking Heads movie, Stop Making Sense. So
Yeah, get it, everybody. You see what he did there?
not yet, because we haven't yet
True.
got to the Talking Head, but it makes sense later. So we learn that Megan is the daughter of Dean Halsey. Dan wants her to move in with him, but she can't.
And now they are engaged. I never picked up on that. They are engaged to be married.
He does. He calls her his fiance a little later on when West comes in, but earlier,
here's the premise.
like minutes before that scene, he's like, "Then why don't you marry me?" And she's like, "I can't marry you."
Yeah, well, let me take you to Trope Town, because here's what's going on here. She says, I can't move in here and we can't get married until you graduate, because I can't marry, someone who can't finish medical, blah, 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 blah. I can't marry you because you're still in school. And what I think is so quintessentially 80s about this moment is that it's like she's only going to college just until he graduates, so then she can drop out, become a wife, and that is going to be her role in this movie, and it fucking sucks.
Yeah.
Like, she is just there to be a damsel, and even then, she's pretty flimsy.
Right. Yeah. That sucks. It really does. But yeah. Yeah. But the whole thing is Daddy is too old school for her to move in.
Oh, God. And this is that other thing. Like, for anyone who watched television in the 80s and 90s or before that, or even now, maybe, this idea... it's that idea of like, well, you can't date my daughter, or like, I'm going to threaten you or scare you. And it's like, that is so fucking creepy.
Oh, yeah.
To be like, you can't have sex with my daughter. I want to. Like, what is going on in America?
It made me think of like all of these recent photos that sort of pop up on the internet that for as objects of derision, where it's basically that. It's like a meme of like a father with his like teenage daughter like clutched in his arms while he's holding like a shotgun or something like that. It's like, you could date my daughter after you go through me or something like that.
Yeah, and that idea is so creepy, and the implication that is sort of bound up in that is something that I don't think we as a culture are still ready to disentangle.
No, well, the thing is, like, I think it's presented as kind of like tongue in cheek, like a bit of a joke, but like it's funny to a particular crowd. That's just not me, and I think. Well,
and that's what I was saying before, is that this movie is that crowd. Like, this is where it's coming from. This is why it's sort of locked in its era, and you really can't take it out of that context, because if you do, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Don't worry, that'll come back later.
Yeah. So then they fool around a bit, and then they run into West again right at the front door. He's there to answer Dan's roommate inquiry.
And Dan says, "Didn't we meet this morning?" And it's like, there is nothing about this man that is forgettable. I you would, the second you open that door, you'd be like, "Oh God, it's you."
Yeah, the line should have been like, "Holy shit, you were really weird this morning."
Yeah.
So West loves the basement, and he produces a wad of cash that woos Dan, despite Megan's protests about West. Who is?
Now, I'm going to tell you right now, because I have had a very similar situation where I interviewed a potential roommate, and the second the guy left, I was like, something about that dude was off a little bit. I don't think this is a good idea. Now, my other roommate and the roommate who was moving out at the time were like, don't be too picky. He seemed fine. And my boyfriend also said that he was going to be fine. And he was not fine. He was the worst fucking roommate I've ever had. So I was Megan in this moment being like, I don't know. I don't think this is the right choice. And everyone else is gaslighting me into being like, you're just overthinking things, except this guy. And I did, and he was a goddamn psychopath. So justice for Megan and justice for me is what I'm getting.
You feel vindicated by the fucking Re-Animator?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, man. When was this?
This was not that long. It was right before I moved into where I live now.
Oh, man.
He was menacing. He was awful. He was like a terrible person.
Did he have a criminal record? Did he murder anybody?
I would not be surprised if he was involved in something like that. I mean, this is not the proper venue to tell you stories, but I could, and they're so strange.
All right, we'll save that. We'll save that for Christmas.
Yep. I mean, that could be a special episode.
Yep. So we cut to class sometime after. Dr. Hill demonstrates how to remove the cranium of a cadaver for a class of students. Graphically,
just like you peel an orange.
I know. I've never peeled an orange.
I don't know how
like
he peels oranges, but
by digging both of his hand, like the fingers of both hands, under the peel of the orange and gradually sliding it up over the meat of the orange.
That's disgusting. Don't ever say that again.
I aim to disgust. So he's graphically peeling the skin of the scalp back, cutting into the bone of the skull with a bone saw, and manually removing the brain.
And then he's just like playing with the brain. He's just like talking, and he has the brain in his hand, like kind of just shuffling it back and forth.
Yeah, he seemed like a kind of guy who was like really kind of game to do anything, like just as long as it was kind of fun. I kind of respect that. Like I could see myself being in the scene where it's like, no. Like, let me actually hold the brain in my hand.
And I've never seen this guy and he's in the Guyver, and I vaguely remember him from that, but I've never seen him in anything else.
I've never seen him in anything else either. And when people talk about this movie, they're like, the great David Gale. And I'm like, who the fuck is David Gale?
Yeah, the great David Gale from what?
I know. He died in 1991. I could definitely see, like, if he had not, like, he probably could have gone on to, like, he has a sort of Christopher Lee presence about him.
I was gonna say, I feel like he was on like an episode of The Twilight Zone or something.
Maybe, but like, yeah, I'd never seen him in anything else. He definitely leaves an impression. He has the squarest jaw I've ever seen.
He reminds me a lot of Fritz Weaver.
Oh yeah, all right, yeah. On some of the supplemental materials, Stuart Gordon was like, he's like Boris Karloff, and I'm like,
No, I don't think anyone's like Boris Karloff except Boris Karloff.
Yeah. So, among these students are Dan Kane and Herbert West. And Hill, in a subtle way, keeps challenging West during the demonstration, who insulted him when they met. And every time he does this, West breaks his pencil for some reason.
I think just to be a jerk.
I love it.
Just to be a distracting asshole.
I suppose. Like, he's the one who's on a couple of pencils, but yeah. They have
I suggest you get a pen.
Yeah, they have another confrontation over Hill being a fraud. So now Hill has dinner with Halsey later that night.
Now let's talk about another trope of inviting the boss over for dinner. And I know it's kind of the other way around here, but it still has that vibe of like, I'm going to invite this important man to my house for dinner. Like, why?
Oh yeah, he's going to make him steamed hams.
He really steamed hams. That's one.
Yep, these steamed hams, they're a bit like the burgers they make at Krusty Burger. Dan arrives, he picks up Megan for like a study date. And in this scene, this is where Hill is kind of intimating that he's into Megan.
Yeah, he's being a fucking creep right out the gate.
Yeah. Now, in the original cut of the movie, there was a subplot, like we said, about him having like hypnotic powers. And there was a scene here where I think they're on the disc too, where he sort of manipulates Dean with Dean Halsey with this, magnificent power of hers. But they were cut right before the scene where Dan enters the dining room. And so throughout the rest of this movie, there are bits and pieces where all of a sudden Dr. Hill's voice kind of takes on this, like, now you are under my power kind of quality. And everybody's face kind of goes slack. But without any sort of context, without this scene that sort of sets it up of him being like really good at hypnotism, none of those scenes make any fucking sense.
Except they leave half of them in the movie. The entire end is predicated on this scene.
Yeah. Like, if you've ever wondered why all of a sudden the zombies like leap up and attack and are like under his power, it's because he like hypnotized them and shit. But there you go.
Yeah, and then before they all leave, he raises a toast to Megan and says, she is the obsession of all who fall under her spell. And I thought, wow, what a creepy thing to say about your boss's daughter.
Yep, but he is a creep. And it's only going to get worse from there.
Yep.
So back at Dan's place, Megan argues with him about being creeped out by West, and Dan's cat is also currently missing. So
here I'm gonna pause again, because this is a second time where we go back to that trope of her sort of this is women in the age. Yeah, this is women forever, basically. So he's being sort of like not sexually aggressive, but sort of like coming on to her real hard. And she's really like not. She's kind of freaked out. She's not into it. She's upset about the cat. She's upset about West. She's just not feeling it. And finally, she's kind of like, just fucking cut it out. I'm not interested. And he like turns that on her in a way that's so gross, and like he's such a big fucking man-child. And the first thing she does is basically apologize for declining his advances.
Yeah. Yep. Oh. Yeah, poor Megan.
Poor everybody.
Yeah. So they go looking for the cat, and they eventually find him in West's room, in his refrigerator, dead. And there's also a serum in a bottle, glowing a violent green.
Did West kill the cat?
I think that we're supposed to struggle with that a little bit, because I think that the case that he gives him is very,
it's strange.
It makes sense in a certain way, but at the same time, maybe he killed his cat.
I mean, he kills a person later, so
yeah, right. So I mean, who knows? I mean, that's kind of like the thing that I think we're supposed to kind of wrestle with a little bit. Because even though the story does make sense about like how this cat like got into the garbage and then put its head in a thing and then it suffocated, like it's a very specific story, and it's like, wait a second, how do you know this?
Yeah. Unless you watched it happen.
He was like, aha, the cat is struggling. I'm gonna give it a few minutes. I could use this.
Yeah, I don't want to believe that he did.
No, because I like him too much.
Also, their house it looks really trashed, like they're just moving in, which it turns out they actually are, but they cut that scene out. And so I'm watching the whole movie and I'm like, why is this place just like a fucking mess all the time? And it's because they just moved in.
Yeah, there's little remarks here and there that like he just moved into the place. I had only just picked up on that, like in recent viewings. So yeah, West, he arrives incensed that they're in his room. Explains that he found the cat earlier that day. Combs is awesome in this scene. I love him. Yeah. He has the weirdest, driest sense of humor.
Didn't you get my note? Cat dead. Details later.
Yep. Yeah. So later that night, Dan is awoken by a horrible shrieking noise in the house, and he goes searching. And he forces his way into the basement, finding West under attack by the previously dead cat. And they go nuts, smashing up everything when they see as the light swings wildly until they beat the cat back to death.
So I think this is maybe indicative of the age of the people who made the movie. There's something about this particular scene, and then like I think going forward about Dan and West's relationship. Is there something very kind of Laurel and Hardy about it, or it's like Three Stooges?
Yeah, you could speed this scene up and put it to Yakety Sax, and it'd be fucking hilarious.
Yeah, because it just has that kind of like it's a very slapsticky kind of buddy comedy.
Yeah, because then
it works. It's great.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, because once they get the cat off of West's back, like the two of them team up with like weapons to find it. It's fucking fantastic. But Dan sees it and realizes that it's his cat, which was dead the last time that he saw it. And so West explains to him how the reagent works, and then he demonstrates it by once again reviving the cat.
And he says, "Don't expect it to tango. It has a broken back."
Yep. So yeah. Megan busts in at the worst time, seeing the cat brought back to life. And this is a thing where I get the feeling that there was more to this scene, because her appearance in the scene is completely pointless, and it's not involved in anything else going forward. But let's see. Dan then goes to the dean with what he's seen, but rather than be amazed, the dean is angry.
So there's a scene in between those two that got cut. Yep. I think this is where it goes. The dream sequence.
Oh, right. Because that's the deleted scene, right? That's on the disc. Yeah.
Which is again just gratuitous nudity. There is kind of a really cool. Have you seen that scene
where they put the reagent in the kind of inner sternum, and it's very effective. I can't figure out how they did it because
it has to be a reverse shot or like because it's so cool that the effect of her coming back to life, not of her like sitting up, but of her like regaining color.
She recolors. which is clearly, I mean, that's just an optical effect that they did. But it's the fact that the needle, the thing that really gets me is the needle, because it's very clearly one of those ones where the needle just slides into the, into the housing. But when they retract it, her skin kind of pulls with it as well, as though this needle is actually in her skin. It's crazy. It's fucking weird. I don't know how they do it.
I think whoever did the prosthetics for this did a really, really good job.
I think John Carl Buechler did a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yep. So yeah, let's see. Dean is angry. He rescinds Dan's grant to study at Miskatonic and informs him that West is expelled. And so later that day, in spite of being all but kicked out of school, Dan sneaks West into the morgue under the cover of a corpse on a gurney going into the morgue.
Now, it is unclear why Dan is helping him anyway. It's more just like, well, because we have to move the plot along.
Right. So a common characteristic of a lot of the sort of the driving forces behind Lovecraft's fiction is obsession. And so there's always a guy who sort of is a bystander and sees something that does not really make sense, but he is fascinated by it to a point that he's going to follow the other guy along just because he's obsessed with it. He's got to see it.
And now that is, I think, a fault in the writing here, because either that or the acting, but I think it's probably more of a writing issue, is that Dan does not sell that. We don't get that from Dan. We get annoyed and freaked out. We don't ever get, but I have to know.
Yeah. Like I think there's some lines that he gives, but they're not terribly memorable. And the way that he sort of conducts himself, the remainder of the movie is he's like traumatized and bothered by everything. So there's like no reason for him to keep going through. And like they really don't hammer the point home that like there is an obsession there, It's just,
right. It's like he's getting dragged along against his will almost, but he doesn't really have the energy or wherewithal to fight it. We never get, I have to see where, I have to see this through to its conclusion, or I have to help this guy, because West is a psycho.
Yep.
And he's not very nice to him either way. And it's everything just leads to a bad end. There's no logical reason. And so it just doesn't work narratively. It's kind of like, well, because how else? We have to keep everybody together to get to the end of the thing.
Yeah. So they quickly go through everybody who's in the morgue, looking for a fresh enough corpse. Remember who's in here, because they're all coming back later.
Yeah, they're all fucking mangled too. For like, what morgue is this? It's like everybody is like a shotgun blast to the face. Their entire body's been engulfed in flames. They fell into a wood chipper. Like everybody is just gross.
It's the county morgue in Toontown, basically. Like everybody's getting blown up by cannons and exploding cigars and shit.
It really is. It's like none of them just died of a heart attack.
Nope. So they do find one that fits the bill. He's a John Doe. And then elsewhere in the hospital, Megan and Dean Halsey arrive and are on the lookout for Dan. Now, when it doesn't look like the dosage work, because what they do is they do inject the corpse with the serum, West adds more to the corpse, who then suddenly springs to life, bleeding from the mouth, freaking out, and throwing shit all over the place. And so this is the last Terminator connection. The guy playing the corpse was Schwarzenegger's stunt double.
Yes.
Terminator. Yeah.
Yep. He's also fully nude for the entire scene, which is kind of wild.
The people who play the corpses, they really, really commit to the bit, because their bits is out there.
Yep.
Yeah. The Dean enters the morgue and is about to open the door to the refrigeration room when the wild reanimated corpse charges the door and knocks it over on him. And then he jumps on top of it, like squishing the Dean. And then he moves the door and he picks up the Dean and beats the shit out of him and he kills him. And so there's nothing that they can do to stop the corpse. So West grabs a bone saw and saws through the corpse, finally bringing him down.
And it's the calmness with which, like, again, this without Jeffrey Combs in this movie, it would have not been good. It would have been forgettable, probably. I mean, it would have been fine, but forgettable.
Yeah.
Because he sells every fucking line. The reason he is so good in this is that he commits so hard to every line. And he just so calmly is just like, Dan, look out.
Yep. God, I love it. I do.
And then he rams the bone saw through his chest.
That effect is so much fun, too, because it's just like we don't see it go into him, but he comes out the front of him.
And you can again, in 4K, sort of see where the prosthetic is sort of laid over. Like you can
Yeah.
see where his head is basically and how it's not, obviously not his body. But even still, it's like it looks pretty good.
It's a great effect. It's a wonderful, awesome effect. So, yeah. Seeing an opportunity with Dean Halsey, West injects him with a serum, and he comes back to life, but he retreats to a corner like a frightened animal. And then after the police come, they take him away to a padded room on the other side of Dr. Hill's office, apparently.
Yeah, that does not make a lot of sense. Like, why does he have a padded cell? But hey, who knows? This was probably explained in some scene that just didn't make it into the movie.
Either that or just shut up. Why are you asking questions?
Like, why you keep asking questions about this stuff?
Hey, shh, just watch the movie.
Why are you still talking?
Yeah. So Hill attempts to comfort Megan, working his mind powers on her, but they're interrupted by Dean Halsey smashing his bloody head on the window.
Yeah, what he says is, I want you to think of me as someone you can come to with your problems. You know, it's like a father, but sexy.
Gross.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character in that he's sort of like a quintessential like 80s like villain from like a sportsman like Caddyshack or Better Off Dead.
Oh yeah.
But with like a 50s sci-fi B-movie villain dimension.
For sure, yeah.
He's just like both of those.
He's got that, like, because also I don't know how old he was at the time of the movie, but he's like significantly older than her.
Yeah.
Maybe as old as the Dean. It's really He's
easily in his, I'm going to say mid to late 60s.
Yeah. So Dan then waits for Megan at her house, and he explains to her that he's not insane, her father that is, but that he's dead. And now West is visited by Hill back at his basement lab. Hill attempts to extort him. He knows that Halsey is dead and under the influence of the reagent. So West hands over his notebook to Hill. But while Hill is distracted with the reagent under a microscope, West sneaks up on him and hits him with a shovel and then pries his head off with it.
Yeah, it's great.
And that scene where the head comes off is so good.
Yeah.
It's so good because it just kind of like lolls to the side.
And he says, what does he say? He's like, I've never tried it with parts before.
Yep. So yeah, with just the head on his desk in a dish, Wes gets an idea. He injects the head with the reagent and then also the headless body. And then sometimes later, the head opens its eyes. And while he's distracted talking to it, the body sneaks up on West and knocks him out.
And now from here on, this is where we get the real like, Herbert, you lovable goofball. You irascible scamp. Like he just has that vibe from here on out.
Yeah. When I remember one of the first times I ever saw a Fangoria magazine was probably around the time that this movie came out, because I remember flipping through it at the news shop and seeing a photo of that scene where like West is looking at the head and the body is behind him. And the head stump is all jagged and fucked up and nasty and shit. And that really burned itself into my memory and scared the shit out of me. Like I would think of it every now and then I couldn't sleep at night and shit. It was so funny.
And then you saw the movie and we're like, yeah, that's what I was afraid of, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because I definitely did have that experience where I was like, all right. So while rifling through Hill's office, Dan finds a folder containing all kinds of stalker-type stuff about Megan.
It just says Meg. It's like in big capital letters, Meg.
Yeah, it's like news clippings, and there's a napkin in there, and like a lock of hair.
Yeah,
stalker stuff.
It's real crazy guy stuff. When I worked at the shelter, we had a resident who lived there, and he had a job. And he was very, very mentally ill, and he had a job. And I would say to Laura, "What do you think he spends his money on?" And she would always say, "I don't know, crazy guy stuff."
He goes down to the crazy guy supply shop.
Yeah, that's what he's got. This file folder, crazy guy stuff.
He's got like a briefcase with a rubber chicken in it, and so. Megan, meanwhile, sneaks up on her dad in the padded room. We find that Hill used the laser drill on him to lobotomize him.
He has a really great kind of 50s sci-fi look. It's very, what's that, Carnival of Souls?
Yes.
Like that real kind of basic spooky, ghoulish makeup that's very effective.
Yeah, it's like, they redden around the eyes and they make his hair look all crazy and shit. I love it, yeah. So Dan finds West coming out of unconsciousness, and we learn that Hill has taken the serum and fled back to his office, where we see the headless body flailing around the office looking for blood packets to pour on Hill's head. And he also lets Halsey out of his padded room, and they sneak down to the morgue.
That scene is fucking gross.
But it's so fucking funny. Like, I love all of the headless body stuff. It's really funny. But now, Hill's body is now wearing the dummy anatomical head that we've been seeing throughout the movie up to this point. So Dan goes to Megan's place to talk to her, but their breakup is broken up by Dean.
It's real good.
Yeah, by Dean Halsey, who breaks in and smashes the place up, knocking Dan out, running off with Megan. So now back at the morgue, Dean Halsey stumbles in, carrying Megan's body, and thus begins the crazy-ass scene that everybody remembers this movie for.
I fucking hate this scene so much because of a couple things. It's gratuitous and gross. I know that there is a certain segment of the population who thinks the head giving head is funny. It's also a rape scene, everybody, so let's laugh at that. In terms of the tone of the movie, it takes such a dark turn that it is. I don't like to see stuff like this in anything. He's tying her down to the gurney, I guess, or whatever, like chaining her up. She's completely nude. I know that this would be okay by 80s standards. It probably would not go over well today, but it is so insanely objectifying in a disgusting way, and it's a rape scene. And everyone's like, it's really wacky, though. Isn't it fun? And it's like, no, this shit is not fun. He has just tied her to a bed and is sexually assaulting her. And he's just doing it in a really fucking gross way.
Not
that there's not a gross way to do it, but
I definitely object to sexual violence of, like, really any kind. It makes me feel really gross, no matter what the era is. Like, it's just, there's nothing, the mixing of the two does not compute. It makes me feel real gross inside, And
it doesn't fit in this film. Like, if you were to watch, I don't know, something like Blood Feast or, some of that shit, it's like, okay, I get, this is a grindhouse film. Like, it's gonna have that shit. It's sexual exploitation. But this is not that movie. This is a wacky film, and I think this is really the scene that speaks to, again, that ideology that produces this movie, in which something like this probably isn't second-guessed. In fact, it seems like they're pretty proud of it. And, even Barbara Crampton is sort of like, it's just a scene in a movie, and I'm sure, what the fuck else is she going to say? But I think to watch it now is very much like, oh, right. This is who created these movies, and this is the hard thing about them. It's like, yeah, we do love them, and they were fun, but they're also disgusting in a lot of ways, in the way that they objectify women. And it was a hard reminder in this fun, kind of wacky, zany movie. All of a sudden, you get this like really aggressive scene, and the faces he's making while he's doing it, and the noises are fucking gross.
Yeah,
and then it's played for laughs. It's real rough.
Is tonally, it is not. It is not in line with the rest of the movie. Like, the rest of this movie is real Looney Tunes shit. This part was probably written with that kind of vibe in mind, but the way that it ends up coming out is not that way. It's she's struggling and screaming and saying no, and like it's silly. But it doesn't hit the way that I think they really intended to. I mean, and then again, who knows? Maybe it's just us. Maybe we're the only fucking,
No, I don't think we are, and I don't think this is this isn't like a postmodernist critique. I mean, the whole point of what I'm getting at is like, when we're watching these movies, and one of the reasons that I like doing this is because we can watch these movies and say, we liked these movies a lot and still do in a lot of ways. But like when we watch them now, we have to do it in a way that acknowledges that this shit was not okay then, even though everybody thought it was cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, that's the thing. It's like, we don't want to say, well, we got to throw all this shit out and never watch it again. We still want to watch it because there is a lot to take away from this that is a fun movie.
Sure.
But this and all these other movies that we're watching, the objective is to watch them and say, wow, that fucking sucks. And I bet it really sucked to be Barbara Crampton in that moment. I bet it sucked to be every woman sitting in that theater watching this shit, half of whom have probably had this happen to them. Like, we can't watch this and not know that stuff. We have to come to the movie knowing that. And it makes it a different experience. It doesn't make it a bad experience necessarily, but we still have to acknowledge it. And it was just kind of fucked to see it this time around and be like, even from a structural perspective, it's just jarring, in terms of how the movie is put together. And then from a kind of, a present day critique, it's like, it also just sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and also maybe I struggle with it a bit because there was definitely a time in my life where I was like, right?
Yeah. But I mean, that's the point, though, is that you can now watch this and be like, yeah, I wish I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Because if you can't do that, if you still come to this and be like, what are you talking about? It's really funny. You can fuck off. You're disgusting.
Right. So here we go. Well, here's the specifics. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably watched this fucking movie, but Megan's naked body is tied down to the table next to the lecherous severed head. And Hill's body gets to molesting the prone woman, but she wakes up and, not fully tied down, swings her free arm to knock the fake head off the body, revealing the jagged neck stump underneath. The body then picks up the head and smushes the nasty thing all over her body, guiding it between her legs. But before they can go all the way, West and Dan run in.
This is when Herbert West becomes the hero of the film.
Yep. So while
because he takes one for the team.
He definitely does. And while West and Hill banter, the whole who's going to listen to a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
Get a job in a sideshow. It has this it's queer sass, but with like a real sneer to it.
Yep. So Dan pulls Megan off the table and guides her away. But it would seem that Hill was anticipating this and had the other corpses injected with the reagent, waiting for the moment to attack. And so Hill reveals to West that the laser drill lobotomy gives him control over the corpses, who now do his bidding.
And you're thinking, wait, what?
I know. It's utterly ridiculous, but the way that they all leap up all of a sudden, I love it. It's a great reveal.
I wish someone had addressed this earlier in the film.
Maybe let us know that Dr. Hill was a master of hypnotism.
That doesn't matter, but still.
Nah. So Megan is now pleading with her father. It brings him to his senses, so to speak, and he rebels against Hill, grabbing his head. He gouges out the eyes, and then he crushes it, throwing it through the door against the wall. And apparently that head model was full of hamburger and syrup blood. And so that's why there's all these bits and mashed up shit that sticks to the wall and all kind of slowly fall off.
Yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, it is gross as hell. This ending scene is disgusting in all the best ways. It doesn't make up for what just happened, but it's close.
It goes from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you ever read the comic books?
No.
So I think it was Dynamite maybe put out, but there's a bunch of different ones. And they did a lot of crossover shit that's probably not that interesting, but there's a short run. It's
remember.
5 or 6.
It was either them or Boom who did Ash versus Re-Animator.
Yeah, it's Dynamite who did that. And those aren't very good, but the standalone, there's a 5 or 6 issue thing. It picks up on a lot of this stuff about the kind of voodoo nature of it and the mind control part. It's pretty good. I really liked it. But they take all of this stuff a lot further. Creating a zombie army is basically what is happening.
Oh, sweet. So yeah, West. Let's see. There's all these there's all these body. The headless body is still rampaging around, even though the head is now dead. West injects it with 2 full syringes to overdose it on the reagent, but this seems to just supercharge the body. So it explodes, and Hill's large intestine surges forward, wrapping itself around West.
Why does this happen?
Because it's awesome, is why.
I mean, it's fine. I enjoy it. I think it's great. But why do his intestines turn into a tentacle monster?
Because it's awesome. That's the only thing I can think of is they were like, you know what this ending needs? It needs to go fucking crazy.
Yeah, it really feels like they were like, how are we going to wrap this up? And someone was like, I have an idea. Intestine monster.
Yeah, because this is the thing is that's also kind of a quality of Lovecraft's stories is they're never like graphically violent like this. Sometimes they are, but they always have this kind of all hell breaks loose quality to them.
Yeah, remember that BBC4 series, the Lovecraft one?
Yes.
Everybody go. What is it? Lovecraft Investigations. Is that what it's called?
Investigations. You know, I don't.
I haven't. I started listening to the last season. I didn't get too far, and I don't listen to too many podcasts, but I started to listen to it and I dropped off. I got to pick it up again because that series was really, really cool.
So good. The Haunter in the Dark, is that the last one?
I think so.
Yeah. Those there's 3 or 4 of them, right?
I think there's 4. These are 4 or 5, but it's a BBC4 Lovecraft Investigations. So cool.
So goddamn good, man. Yeah. So, yep. One of the corpses drops some noxious acid on the floor, which fills the room with fog. And so Halsey helps Meg escape. The other corpses grab him and literally tear him to pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or do they? Because there's a sequel.
Oh, that's right. But
there's actually 2 sequels.
That's right. Because yes, and Dr. Hill comes back somehow in Bride of Re-Animator. That's the thing. I didn't mention that. There are 2 sequels to this. There's Bride of Re-Animator, and then there's Beyond Re-Animator, which I've never seen. I hear it's not very good. So, he's ripped. He's torn to pieces. West is still ensnared by the intestine. He throws his bag to Dan as he flees, and he is presumably killed. And they're about to make it to the elevator when the shotgun wound corpse grabs Dan. Dan kills it by reaching into the wound and pulling out his brain.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. And then once more, they're about to escape when the burn victim corpse grabs Meg. And unable to break his grip, Dan runs and gets a fire axe, chops off his arm, but not before he chokes Megan to death. And now topside, Dan tries to revive Megan, but she's unresponsive. And he grieves.
We got it. This is where we close the loop from the beginning.
Yeah. He does the whole chest compression thing. He grieves for a bit, but then he gets an idea. He fills the syringe with the reagent, and he goes to inject her. And then we fade out on everything but the syringe. It injects. Megan screams. Roll credits.
It's a great ending.
It is. It's a hell of an ending, man. Like it really gives you the business at the end there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reanimator.
Reanimator.
Well. What do you think? What do you think about that? How's that age for you?
So yeah, like we said, that Megan on the table scene. It's regrettable that is the most noteworthy characteristic of this movie because it objectively sucks, and there is so much more going on in this movie that could easily have substituted as like the memorable thing about Re-Animator, you know. But it's very colorful. It's got some subtext that I fucking hate, but it's still a really fucking great horror movie. And it's the moment in the 80s where filmmakers kind of upped their ante. They were like, oh shit, we can actually get away with this. Because when you release a movie unrated like that, and it reviews well and it still does business, it's kind of like that moment in the 70s when Marvel kind of challenged the Comics Code Authority and found out that they were ultimately a toothless organization.
Yeah.
And that from that point on, you could just make fucking gore-fest horror movies and it fucking didn't matter. People loved it and people got really excited about it. And it was a sea change. So yeah, Re-Animator. It's a lot of fun.
It's tough because you can't take it out. I mean, you can't really take any of this out of the context in which it's created. But this one is really specifically a product of its era. I mean, aesthetically, in terms of the ideology, like it's just all very, very mid-'80s. And it suffers in that way from all those tropes and the kind of shitty perspectives. But there is so much to really love about it. Like, there's a reason why it was so universally, maybe not beloved, but it was well received by critics, including the 2 most critical of horror films. So really kind of appreciated it because it it has a fun sensibility. It feels like some of the shit that Corman cranked out in the 50s and 60s. And unfortunately, it suffers from all this other stuff that kind of overshadows it. But it is a fun one. I just don't think it ages well. It's really more of like a... I think the love of this movie says more about our drive for nostalgia than it does about its appeal as an enduring cultural product.
Yeah.
But it's a shame because there is something really fun about it.
Yeah. The thing is like it really does sort of encapsulate a lot of basically more things that I love about horror movies than most other horror movies do. Like, it's a comedy that doesn't feel ridiculous. It's silly and it's got like real zany shit in it. But that sense of humor is kind of it's old school in a way that
it's slapstick. It's a slapstick comedy.
Right. But like there are other sort of slapsticky horror movies that do that, but just don't do it as well. And I don't know what it is. It's an intangible something.
It's because it's smart. They are smarter than I think your average horror writer was at the time, and they weren't so fucking up their ass about it. Like, something like Night of the Creeps, where it's like, oh, you're a kind of 4chan jerk off who is a little bit pissed because you're not getting as much attention as you think you deserve. Whereas this is like they genuinely are pretty. I think they're pretty confident, and it doesn't have that sort of snide, mean sense of humor. I think sometimes it does, but generally it is coming from a place of fun. It just so happens that they're also part of a kind of male-centric kind of gross culture at the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Re-Animator. Some of it's fun.
Yep. Some of it's not.
All right. So what are we doing next?
Oh, in 2 weeks we are, I guess, doing The Hitcher for some reason.
Oh, I'm looking forward to The Hitcher.
Okay. I don't think I've seen it since, I don't know, 1990 maybe.
Yeah. I can't really wait. Well, I can't wait to talk about it, mostly because of the movie's writer, Eric Red, is a really fucked up individual. And we'll get into it when we get into it. But yeah. So in 1 week, we'll be back with 99-Cent Rental looking at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We'll be back in 2 with The Hitcher.
All right.
See ya.